So my name is Stephen Thomas Yeakley. I'm an artist and a designer. I'm also a husband and a father, and I'm glad to be here. So I just want to reference some recent work I've been working on. This is a little peek into the world that I've worked on this past year. It's a series called Culture Makers. It's these large format portraits that I've made with my dear dwarf. They're black and white on Impossible Project, which is instant film. And I've been shooting different notable makers in the community of Tucson to celebrate Tucson. So we have architects, there's Rick Joy, we've got makers, pizza makers, this is Anello's, Scott Gerard, and others in the community that have been making it. So I'd encourage you to check out that series. It lives on my website and also on Instagram. And you'll get to that at the end of the presentation, but just a little note there. And then for me as an artist, process is very important. Understanding beyond just what the end result is, but how we got there and why. So I'm always interested in behind the scenes. So that's also featured on my Instagram. You can learn more about that and see kind of a peek behind the curtain of what's going on in Steve's brain. So today, there's nothing to writing. All you do is sit down at a typewriter and bleed. So that's widely accredited to Ernest Hemingway. I don't know if that's officially true or not. As I did my fact check, you never know. But the reason I love this quote is that as an artist, I think we're invited to step up and offer our voice and from our story. And so that's what I'm going to do today is offer you and invite you guys into my story and how over these last years, it's been a pretty rocky road. There's been a lot of bruises and bumps along the way that have led to some hard things, but also from those hard things, transformation is happening. So as Josh noted, this month's theme is end. And this past weekend, or when I was asked about end, I said, oh, I know exactly what I want to talk about. And it occurred to me this past weekend on our family camping trip on Mount Lemmon, we escaped with half of Tucson, it seemed like, up onto Mount Lemmon. And at that point, we really enjoyed ourselves. We had a little pop-up trailer and camped as a family, and it was a great time. But on that camping trip, a part of it was that we went for a hike as a family. And as we went on that hike, we saw all the old pine trees that had been burned. If you guys remember over the last 12 years, how many fires have been on Mount Lemmon. And as we walked, we stopped and there was a pine cone on the trail. And we picked it up and promptly got sap all over our fingers and then set it back down. But kept going on that hike, and the life cycle of the pine cone started to ruminate in my brain as I was thinking as we were driving down the mountain from the weekend. And I began to think about it. And the life cycle of the pine cone is that it starts as a bud and it grows to a point where then it detaches and falls to the ground and lays dormant. And it's not until you have an external event that then the pine cone jumps or springs into action. And that process is called serotiny. I didn't know this, so this is learning for me. You guys can learn with me. Serotiny is an ecological process in which the seed release occurs in response to an environmental trigger, specifically a fire. It's only through a fire can the pine cone open and transform its structure, allowing seed release to happen and new growth can take place. And I love that picture, this metaphor. Largely because these past years have held fires for me in my personal life, and a fair share of unexpected endings happening. In 2016, my daughter was diagnosed with cancer, and she was 3. In 2017, my brother died suddenly of a heart attack when he was 40. And in 2018, it was an end of a business partnership that was 5 years old. Today's talk is not just to reference those hardships these last years have held, but really the seeds that emerged from having walked through those fires. They've brought about change and allowed seeds to be planted in preparation for new growth. And it's up to us and how we respond to those fires and unexpected endings that defines what comes next. So before I go any further, a caveat. No man is an island, and I could not have made it through these past years, these 3 years, without love and support of my wife. our families supporting us, and then the community at large coming in, stepping in with us to support us and our family. So this isn't a story about how strong I am or we are, as much as in the midst of difficulty, in the midst of weakness, and leaning on others in times of great need. So the first fire, January 13th, 2016, my daughter was diagnosed with cancer. She had a Wilms tumor. Her right kidney had been transformed into this tumor, but we were found out. It was a malignant growth, and on a Wednesday, that was a Wednesday, we had it diagnosed. On Thursday morning, we were at the hospital getting an MRI. It was confirmed, and by Friday morning, early in the morning at 6 a.m., she was wheeled away into surgery to remove that grapefruit-sized tumor. And this white mass that you see here, that's the tumor. And I just want to reference, this is a happy ending. You saw us earlier on Mount Lemmon. That was my daughter. She's my eldest daughter, Miriam. But she is doing great. But surgery took place. After that surgery, it went to chemo, and we did a long slog of 9 months of walking with her through the chemo process. She lost her hair. Her immune system was diminished. And it was a season where we didn't get out much. That was intentional to help her. But in that process, it was really a special time for our family to be together in the midst of a very difficult circumstance. We did go on a Make-A-Wish trip, which was awesome. It was really restorative for our family to go on that. And this month, it's 3.5 months since we've had that diagnosis, and she's doing wonderful. She's doing amazing. You couldn't even tell if she was hurting, if she ever had cancer, really. She is the brightest, most acute little girl who's 7 now, or almost 7 in the 2 months. But with her diagnosis, it was the end of life as we knew it for our family. We were down in it, facing uncertainty, working to keep moving forward and not knowing what was going to happen. And while we were at the hospital, we met and watched other families in similar situations, in similar struggle, some without the positive results that we had, and ultimately losing their child. And it really broke our hearts to be in the midst of that. So watching others struggle, watching others people struggle through made us want to give back. And while Miriam's diagnosis was the end of life as we knew it for our family, it opened our hearts to start something more and to do good in the world. Out of that fire, seeds were planted, and Little Brave Sheep was started. So Little Brave Sheep is actually what we coined for Miriam as she was going through her cancer journey, because we didn't know exactly what was going to happen, but she had to be courageous in walking through that. This is my daughter, Miriam. This is like 1.5 years old, so it's a little older. But once Miriam finishes her cancer journey in 2 years, the plan is to establish Little Brave Sheep to care for single moms and orphans who have to face the struggles of cancer and going through that whole process, because they shouldn't have to face that alone. And the focus of that is just small, deep contributions to kids and families to have a lasting impact, no matter what the outcomes. But the desire to give back was cemented in us as we went through and saw the neediest of kids and families suffer. And the challenge for us was how to give back. So I would say stay tuned, but that's a seed planted that came from the fire of us walking with our daughter through her cancer journey. The next was on April 13th, 2017. My brother passed away suddenly of an undiagnosed congenital heart condition while he was riding his mountain bike out in our favorite park in Colorado Springs, Colorado, where his wife and boys now live. The shock and the sudden loss of losing my brother and the tragic circumstances for my sister-in-law to lose her husband and for her boys to lose their dad really changed me walking through that process. Again, it was the end of life for the Yeakley family as we knew it, where I no longer had my brother, and for my dad and my mom and my sister and I, and what family was. One piece of that reality of that situation was that I might have the same heart condition as my brother. And so I had a stress test on my heart and in the process was confronted with the uncomfortable reality of my own mortality and how frail life is. It makes you appreciate what you have. And gratitude frames life by not living with the mentality of all that you do or don't have. It invites you to give thanks for today because you don't know what tomorrow holds. So, out of the fire, seeds were planted. So Stephen Thomas Yeakley, me as an artist, was born. Previously, I never gave myself the chance to truly create work. It was always in the commercial world and had to sell. And my journals became these graveyards for ideas that never made it off the page. They just stayed in these journals that would be stashed away in my desk. So the invitation was that I need to take those ideas and actually create them. So I wanted to be diligent about that creation process and put them on a schedule. That was thanks to Francois and Jane for that encouragement, if you know them. And work hard at doing it. Don't just let it lie dormant, but go out and actually create. So today is actually an exercise for me of actually practicing doing that. So being in front of you, once I go through this talk, there's actually a series of artwork that I'm going to present to you all of something I've been working on that I'm super excited about, and it's something that is called The Door, an exit and an entrance. So it's relevant that I would be here and offering artwork today with you all. And that's my brother there. He's an outdoorsman. He loved to climb, loved to do things, and it's poetic. We just don't know how much time we really have in life. So this is an actual calculation of how many days and hours and minutes that he lived in seconds. Make it count, people. The next fire was in April 2018, as my business partnership eroded and we reached an impasse, and they wanted to take the studio in a different direction than I was willing to go. And I was outnumbered and had to figure out what to do next. And it was the end of a fruitful 5-year partnership. I learned a lot from a talented team, and it was humbling to transition away, but it was for the best. With my transition, it led me down a path of clarity to who I am and what I'm about, and to whom I want to give myself to. I found myself a part of a great team of technologists and creatives over at Hydrant, and I have the opportunity to shape the business and how all of me is engaged there, which is awesome. And out of that fire, the seeds that were planted, it forced me to look for opportunities to give back in the community and the design community. So as a designer, I think we have the responsibility to use design for good. That led me to the Interact project here in Tucson. It's led by Joel Harris, if you guys know Joel. He's a designer over at the University of Arizona. And that's working to introduce design to at-risk youth and invite them to understand that the career path of design is broad and you can use your creative talents in many different ways. So that's coming this fall, and it's going to be in schools, which is really awesome. And it's an opportunity for mentorship to go in with these kids, help them understand the practice of design and opportunities that they could grow into over time. And largely that stems from my own experience of wishing I would have had somebody that came alongside and introduced me to that early in life. No one really did that, and I'm glad I ended up finding design in the process. But yeah, so my story is not too dissimilar probably from some of yours. And while some of us, you might not have walked through the exact fires that I've walked through in these past couple of years, but we all have a narrative that's tainted with loss, trials, and failures to reach the completion of our visions that we have. And it sounds a lot like life. As seasons and relationships and partnerships come to an end, it really is the beginning of something new. And while the process is disorienting, disheartening, and can lead you to question yourself, the adverse reaction is also true, is that it centers you on what is true and what you are made to do, and invites you to focus and give thanks for what you have today. The fires we walk through bring about change and the seeds to be planted in preparation for new growth. It's up to us and how we respond to those fires that defines what comes next. Are we going to sit there and complain about it? Or do we have the opportunity to be grateful? And I choose great gratitude and thankfulness, and I challenge you to do the same. So the artwork that I have today that I wanted to present, I work as an artist utilizing large format cameras. So we're talking about Ansel Adams, old school field cameras that have the large bellows, and it's big and clunky and super slow, but that's part of the process for me. And today is a series of photographs, series of threes, so triptychs. And within those triptychs, there's a progression from left to right, and we'll get to that. But the concept of the door is as an exit and an entrance. So what is the door? If you see here, the door that I'm referencing is the grave. This is actually a grave site at the bottom of the grave. It looks like the door is closed here. The door is closed as an exit. And this work is dedicated to that thought of treating the grave as a doorway, an exit and an entrance, depending on how you look at it. So on this side of the door, things break down. They're in a state of decay. They're becoming undone, not as they should be. In this series, we have a progression from left to right. And this is shot on old Polaroid Type 55 peel-apart film. The progression starts with things in wholeness to coming undone to being cut apart. The next series is how this piece of fruit is then molding and shriveling, curling up to the point where it's totally molded and it's invited different little insects to crawl on it in decay. For this series, this is actually my story written out on a piece of paper. It's here in wholeness, it's being burned up, and it's burned. And then for this progression, it's the wholeness of the stone, how it's broken apart and then pulverized and broken apart fully at the end of the day. And this represents this side of the exit, not as it should be. But if you flip the progression and treat the grave as an entrance, what if it was an invitation to a place that's peace-filled, where things are being restored, coming back together, and it's not as it will be? So now the triptychs, the progression is reversed, where we start with things being pulled apart, to them mending now, and being restored back to wholeness. We start with decay, things being renewed to their full countenance. We start with the scars of being burned and how those are being treated and being brought back to fullness. Lastly, we take what's broken, things are being put back together and being placed back into the fullness of that. Before I get to that one, this work is a series of triptychs, and each highlight the experience of our humanity, as we all have been crushed, cut, burned, and so on. But these triptychs mean something completely different when you reorder the progression, right? The progression of image becomes a hopeful message of restoration, not just disintegration. That there is hope for peace someday. And I want to reference process. This is in the attic of Hydrant. But you can see the shooting on the camera and the process of the peel apart film and things like that. And again, for me, process is very important to understand thinking and progression through. And this morning, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for this moment to share with you all. I think it's important and good for us to consider with you our perceptions of what fires hold in our lives, that there is hope beyond what you see, and that new growth will come from the ends that we face. You can follow my work at stephenthomas.co. You can find me on Instagram at @Yeakley. Thanks.